I'm so tired. How are we going to do this thing? We're doing it on Trinity. I'm just going to, dude, you're going to have to lead us through this.
You're going to have to put a disclaimer in, like, we have no intention of deviating from any Orthodox creed on the Trinity.
If it happens,
if
it's
we
because we're
do
stupid.
That's unintentional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Double stupid. Yeah. Anyway, so bottom line, we got some cool stuff. We'll get to it, is what I'm saying. So if you sort of threw me an email or whatever, very stoked. Thank you. All good. I love to do all of that stuff. So there's been nothing that I've been like, oh, no, I don't want to touch that. So we will look at it all. Just got to find the time. So anyways, we've committed to just kind of move on with just these basic doctrinal categories, just to set up an initial playlist for anyone who's interested in just getting some of the basics down. And we've almost randomly picked Horton's text, Pilgrim Theology, which is kind of like the name, Pilgrim, Sojourner. And Horton's a good dude. Let's be honest.
We do like a bit of Horton.
Yeah, we do. So, not like we're doing his work any justice whatsoever. So, so hey, Mike, if you're listening to this, sorry, man.
Yeah, hey, Mike.
Yeah. But we want to kind of work through the Trinity today. We've looked at the attributes of God and the Trinity. So this is obviously a big subject, and it is a large chapter in his book. And so, it actually is quite a surprisingly detailed book for an intro, a detailed chapter, at least for an intro text. So I probably actually wouldn't even recommend this particular chapter for someone who's starting off in theology. Probably Grudem or something like that.
Yeah,
should just be your go-to, because he does get.
It's not a bad chapter.
It's a great chapter.
It's just got a lot, and there's like little caveats into like Calvin's view on the Great Schism and things like that you don't really need on your first.
It's just quite overwhelming if you're thinking about it from that perspective. But it's a good chapter for sure, like everything else in the book. So what we'll do is just maybe simplify it a little bit and just work with some of the basic rudiments. I think. What do you want to kick us off? Anything to say there in terms of?
I do. I mean, just outlining the importance of it. It's not just important for doctrinal orthodoxy, but actually, I think that there is actually, as one of the points he makes as well. It's also important for Christian experience, but I think. I was very surprised. We did another excellent book on the Trinity by Tim Chester. I can't remember the name of the book. It's a red book. I think it's called Enjoying the Trinity. But it's a very, very good chapter. It's not a detailed doctrinal thing. It's just about the practical relevance of the doctrine of the Trinity to the Christian life. But and it wasn't rocket science at all. It was beautifully written, but it was pretty standard stuff. Anyone who's been in this territory wouldn't be surprised by anything in there, But I was really surprised at how a lot of my church really struggled. It was like, we don't even know how to pray anymore. Like they were almost angry.
Wow.
At how like they used to think in these nice easy categories, and now the doctrine of Trinity has come along and confused them. And it's like messing. Like, who do we pray to? The Father, Son, and Spirit. Like, don't know who to pray to.
Yeah.
Who are we worshiping? Who do I have? Like it's like thinking about the Trinity. Is almost perceived as an inconvenience. Right.
So that it's almost like they were actually at least kind of Unitarians, and it categorized it functionally that way, and or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, this is so. My church has been a doctrinally orthodox church for ages, and so I think on paper, if you ask people, do you believe in the Trinity?
Of course,
everyone's going to be like, yeah. Absolutely. But when you start to say, sort of think through some of the implications of the Trinity for other beliefs that we have, or for some of the practices, or about things like prayer and that, that's when it really starts to kind of expose that actually we want to tick the box of doctrinal orthodoxy, but we really just want to stay there, because I don't want you messing with my mindset. It's like it's an inconvenient truth, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. And it reminds me also of another kind of knee-jerk reaction to the doctrine. We know it's important, but it's so confusing and so technical, and so very quickly gets labeled with the mystery tag. That's just a mystery. Yes, we believe it. And what often happens, well, two things happen, I think. Firstly, people say heretical things about the Trinity in the name of mystery, like they'll talk about God being one in the same way that he is three, and he is both one and three in the same way, in the same relationship, and just straight up contradictions. And they'll talk about
God is one and God is three.
God is three, and then you'll ask them, "What do you mean by that?" Well, we just mean it's both. And like both concerning his essence, and and so just all sorts of things start coming out but it's just mysterious, so we don't know. You just got to accept it. And then I think a lot of people struggle with the Trinity as a result of that, because they're like, I'm not going to believe a contradiction. I'm not going to do it. No. That's like intellectual suicide, and no one's asking you to do that. There is mystery, but as R.C. Sproul always used to say, there's a difference between paradox and contradiction. There's a kind of supra-rational element, but that doesn't mean that there's a contradiction. It just means it's a seeming, contradiction at best. But in fact, we're never making contradictory statements. So there is that's an important idea that one has to keep in mind when looking at the doctrine. Don't put the mystery tag on too soon. And the other thing is that the mystery tag, it's almost like if you just hang on a little bit with that mystery tag, you do have to put it somewhere. There does come a point where you have to go, okay, well, that's just something we're never going to figure out, or that's something that's mysterious. But it is so much more profound and awesome to know exactly where the mystery starts. And then what always surprises me is how much is actually not even intended to be mysterious, that you had just kind of shrugged into that mystery pile. And in fact, there's this whole segment of theology that actually is revealed in the Bible quite clearly, not even that mysterious, well, relatively speaking, and you're totally supposed to know this stuff, so it actually does affect, practically it affects things. It affects other points of doctrine. It affects Christology, which is what we'll get to eventually, but yeah, so we got to look at it, is what I'm saying. And the people might be surprised, hopefully not inconvenienced, but
well, good. I mean, good. You need to be stressed. It's that whole concept, like the standard kind of Muslim argument against Christianity is it's too confusing to understand. It's not helpful. Like we have such a beautiful, clear, simple way of understanding about God. He's one, pure and simple. But the problem is that actually it's not a good thing if your conception of God is so easy. It's really simple to get your head around. Actually, whenever you think of God, it should be mind-blowing.
Right.
And that should be obvious not only from things like the Trinity, but just think of the eternity of God. Get your head around that God has always existed. And so there shouldn't be an avenue or an aspect of God's being that we think about and think, do you know what, this is not stretching me at all. I find this totally simple.
Right, exactly. And it does actually remind me, like, you've got, and I realize this might be getting off from the basics, but just, if anyone does want to look at this, I mean, you've got, if it should be resonant with created reality as well. There should be something about the Trinity that is both profound, mysterious, totally mind-boggling, and yet very resonant. And I think one of the things, I'm not a massive fan, as people know, of the John Frame's perspectival deal, but I think there are two elements that I felt really he's onto something. Where if you limit the universe of discourse, so to speak, in philosophy, I think he's really, he has found a good way to categorize everything via this tri-perspectival deal. And that's important because it's to do with, how we know truth. And so there's a resonance with something there's a threeness about things that's not random. It's just it must be that way. Same thing with Van Til's, beginning with the triune God, and a lot of that comes through in what he says in apologetics and just substantiating just everything, from that starting point. And I feel like that comes through. And then what I was going to say as well with Fram's thing is he's like loath to go there, but when he does, I think it makes a lot of sense. The Trinity and its reflections in the threeness of things, and his tri-perspectivalism. So there's that to look at for that point. But I think just to not get ahead of ourselves and just to kind of work through the stuff that typically we would work through. I mean, if you're asking if someone comes to you on the street, maybe not on the street, but just having coffee. Weak Christianity, number one. So what is the Trinity? How do we know this is biblical? Someone told me it wasn't biblical. What do you tell them?
So there's two questions there. What is the Trinity, and is it biblical? To do that, I mean, short of going through all the proof texts. Okay, so if you're looking
I think it's kind of helpful to work through what you would do, even if we don't go through all the proof text. Like what's the process there?
Okay. Well, I guess my first port of call when trying to persuade someone or demonstrate just in the clearest way possible that the doctrine of the Trinity has to be true. Yeah. Is just to start with your creator-creature distinction.
Okay.
So then you've got the creator, and then you've got everything else, and then say, well, where do you put the Son? Where do you put the Spirit? Mm-hmm. And I think that, again, for even the newest Christian, the weakest Christian, there is at least a reluctance to place the Spirit and the Son anywhere outside of the Creator.
Right, because you've got texts that just talk about the Father as God, the Son as God, the Spirit as God. So it's just you got all those things are true, and yet they're not the same person. So you've got to do something with that biblical data.
Yeah, exactly. And everything, all of the complex language of the doctrinal Trinity is just trying to, of the doctrine of the Trinity, is just trying to create the kind of boundaries for the field of play.
Right.
So like, if you stay within these boundaries, you're safe. If you go outside of these boundaries, you're unsafe. So all of the kind of complex language of eternal processions and eternally begotten, all that kind of stuff is just really saying, look, the Bible says there's one God. The Bible says the Father is God. The Bible says the Son is God. The Bible says the Spirit is God. The Bible says that they are distinct from each other. One hand, boom, there you go. So,
there we go. Yeah, exactly. So, and going back to our doctrine of simplicity, I think we did talk about that already, that philosophical arc, I'm almost positive I mentioned something about that at that point. This would be a total train smash if I haven't. But basically, there was the thing where you've got the godness of God going above the created order, to follow on what you were saying there. And the bottom line is, you only have one God, and he is above the ark, the arch or the ark, however you want to pronounce it in that sense. He is the one who is uncreated. And, if you put time in that above the ark, if you take the create, then you've made time God. That's just how it works. And so, we're putting 3 above the ark. And yet there's only one. And so you can only have one because there can only be one God. There's only one above the ark. That's the rule. And so you're kind of playing with that dynamic when you're looking at these things. And, these are established principles that you have to work with already. So you've got the straight up biblical sort of text to deal with, the concepts there, exactly what you just mentioned on those 5 points, and then you've got the philosophical quandary that you've got to move around with, giving rise to all of the technical language. But saying it like that, you realize, okay, well, it almost reminds me a little bit of, I don't want in any way sort of speak simplistically of the Trinity or make it seem like it's more simple than it is, or try and lessen the gravity involved in the subject or the reverence and awe we should have in approaching the study of God. But I think to help for people who are freaked out by the subject, it reminds me a little bit, and this is an analogy, it probably does fall flat. So just everyone relax, breathe, chill. When you say 1 + 1,
water, ice,
no. When you say 1 + 1, I'm not even going to say. I'm not even going to say 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. I'm going to say 1 + 1 = 2. So now you know it's an analogy, right?
Okay, right. Yeah,
Right.
okay, yeah.
1 + 1. I'm not even talking about the Trinity. I'm just talking about math now.
I
1
got it,
+
Mike.
1.
I got it.
1 + 1 = 2. Okay.
Mhm.
Can you prove that? Do you think you can prove that?
Yes, I think
How?
so. I got one book
Yeah.
plus another book.
Right. Okay.
Now I've
Now
got 2 books.
you got 2 books when you put them together. You see them there. I can see 2 books. I think the theory is sound, right? And so,
Yeah, I think so.
that's math. It's in the, that's what it is. There is more one can say about Pythagorean theory, and how that develops, and you can add to 1 + 1, you can get equations involving, certain more developed ideas that surround the same principle. But and that's true, but it's never going to change that fundamental fact that 1 + 1 = 2, Now, again, I'm not in any way saying the Trinity equals 2 or anything. I'm saying that in terms of the concept, at the basic level, you've got the Bible saying something about God. And yes, it's true that they've had to work it out on extremely detailed philosophical levels that, you might be involved with at some point that you might have to look at, but probably not everyone has to look at, Pythagorean theory. And they can still affirm, even without knowing Pythagorean theory, that this 1 + 1 = 2. There's a basic sort of sense in which math is math, and then you can develop on that. So same sort of thing, I think, with the Trinity. As long as you're not saying something wrong at the baseline, which we could do. I mean, to use that analogy in a bad way, I could just say God is 3. There we go. But as long as we're not doing that, and we're just going, okay, here's the biblical data. He's 1 in this way. He's 3 in this way. I don't understand exactly how it works. You're basically onto the subject, and you deepen it out from that point. But it's not like you can't ever access it. In that sense. I don't know if that makes sense, or is that me just
No, it does. It does make sense.
Dumbass?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right,
no,
cool.
I think that's right. You've got your baseline. You've got your baseline things, and the baseline things are, look, there's one God. That is the essential. If you're chatting to your Jewish buddy or your Muslim buddy or whatever, and they're concerned about you worshiping multiple gods, you don't. You worship one God. That's the fundamental doctrine of the Christian faith. There is one God.
Yeah.
But you are also recognizing that one God has been revealed or describes the Father as being God, describes the Son as being God, describes the Spirit as being God. And so, there is a paradox, and that many perceive as a contradiction. But we'll talk about it. But that it's not a contradiction if you make a distinction between essence and persons.
Yeah.
But the final thing that is really important, and people often use this as an objection to the Trinity as well, is they'll say, "Oh, but how come you see the Son talking to the Father?" And so surely that means that Jesus can't be God if he's talking to God.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, well, no, that's exactly the doctrine of the Trinity, because the Father is distinct from the Son, the Son is distinct from the Spirit, and so there's unity of essence, but there's distinction in the persons, and that language took a long while to develop. But the whole point of that language, like you say, is to get that basic baseline truth right about one God, 3 persons.
Yeah, good. And actually, that's a good point to bring in the economic Trinity, the the immanent Trinity, or how people divide it in different ways, the transcendent, immanent, whatever. But you have basically this idea. Well, actually, even before that, with the idea of, you mentioned Islam before, but if you don't have the Trinity with 3 persons who have a relationship with one another, you really have no foundation for love and those basic realities that can't be accounted for until creation begins. At some level, that makes God dependent on creation to have this experience of love. And so the Trinity is really important for things like that, even prior to creation. But then creation does happen, and we go from thinking about God, beyond creation, to an economic presentation of the Trinity in time, so to speak. And this is where a lot of the debates happen because a lot of the idea that often comes out of this is, well, is God the way he is outside of time, outside of creation, in the same way that he is as he is revealed in creation? And a lot of this has to do with subordination. Jesus is subordinate to the Father, happily says that. The Spirit, is sent from Jesus, and there's all these kinds of things. So is that how it is all the time? Is that how it's always been? Is this part of the ontological Trinity? And so, what are your thoughts on that one?
And I think that basically, again, it's a helpful illustration of how we're just trying to defend those baseline truths. So if you say that God there is an ontological subordination, within the very kind of being of God, there is a distinction of authority or an inequality of authority or something like that. And are you not implying that Jesus and the Spirit, the Son and the Spirit, are lesser gods or lesser than the Father?
Right.
And that's a big problem, because you're transgressing one of the baselines. But also, from the point of view of those who would argue, you could say, well, if there is a change, if God represents himself differently in the economic Trinity, the way that the Trinity is revealed in time and space, then does that mean that God is changed in his nature somehow? And so again, that's another essential kind of doctrine of God that you don't want to cross that line. And so somewhere between those two boundaries, you don't want to distort the being of God as in Father, Son, Spirit equally God. You don't want to cross that boundary, but you also don't want to say God is changing somehow.
Right. And I think one of the helpful things, someone has, again, I realize it's hard to even touch the subject lately without diving into a lot of controversy that has arisen. It is worth looking into, and I don't want to oversimplify anything now or, dismiss it at this point. But I think one of the things that's been helpful to me is just thinking about, you do get subordinationism, which is, as you say, you're sort of implying some sort of subordination within the essence rather than the persons, and even ontologically rather than economically. But then you get subordination, which is at least what we're happy to say within the economic Trinity, there was obviously some necessary level of subordination. So subordinationism and subordination need to be kept. Just make sure that we're keeping that apart without solving the problem now. Just to have those categories for people to work with. And then the other thing is to make sure that if we're, as you said, like if there is no subordination between the Father and the Son in any single way, if there's no fatherness about the Father or processionality about the Son or begottenness of the Son, not processionality of the Spirit, then what makes the Father the Father? What makes the Son? Does the Father need to be the Father as he is the Father in the economic Trinity? Is it the Son that needed to be incarnate, or could the Father have been incarnate without any difference, really? Because there is no difference. You don't want to go there. There is a necessary distinction between the persons, even in the ontological Trinity. Yeah. So, as you say, you've got to keep these things, just almost like keep the majors where they're supposed to be, and then work out the details from that point. But be careful of crossing those lines.
But also, be careful of accusing someone of heresy. Yeah. Because a heresy is when someone is clearly transgressing one of those baseline foundational
areas,
pillars of areas. So it might. Would this be a helpful point to talk about some of the classic mistakes that people make?
I was just one more thing before we do that, maybe. Yeah. Because it kind of the other stuff gets us straight into the East-West debate and all that. But let's, perichoresis is an important concept, just based on the counterpoint there of what I was saying earlier. What is perichoresis? You want to have a quick and dirty, nasty? No. All right, great. Let me read it. This.
Don't have
all right.
Over to you, Mike.
This interrelationship between persons is further underscored by the term perichoresis. This is straight out of Horton, which refers to the mutual indwelling of the persons in each other. I find this to be particularly mind-burning. And it's Kleinian to the core, because you've got a lot of like this Christ who is the Spirit. You know, all of that stuff. This relationship is underscored in John, underscored where? Oh my goodness, it just went, my iPad just broke on me. Page 97.
I've got it.
Page 97.
Yeah, it's in John 1:18. Is that it? The relationship is underscored in John's Gospel, where Jesus speaks of himself as being in the bosom or at the side of his Father from all eternity, and engaging with the Father and the Spirit in a mutual exchange of gifts and activities.
A little bit further there as well. No one comes to the Father except through the Son. In fact, to know the Son is to know the Father also. This notion of perichoresis, a unity of will and action, is not an alternative to a unity of essence, as is taught by Latter-day Saints or Mormonism, as well as social Trinitarianism. Rather, the essential unity of the persons is the presupposition for their shared life. There is therefore an intimate unity of these three persons that cannot be duplicated in any creaturely community. So I think that's just important to say, because it's not quite as simple as saying, you know, the persons are, you know, three persons, one essence, and it's almost like you get a weird view. It's almost like a false diagram. You know, it hasn't got the overlapping bits, and this is really where all diagrams would fail. You know, it's almost like you actually just need three circles on top of each other, which doesn't make a great diagram, but it's just like, you know, you've got that kind of thing going on.
If you look to, you know, figure 2 in your textbooks,
it looks like a circle, but actually, you know, they're fully overlapping, but they're three of them.
I did once see a version of that, which is basically one object, which was a 3D object, but viewed from a 2D perspective. So it was kind of that that sort of thing. And then the object would move. So you would what looked like three lumps from a 2D perspective was actually one thing. So I'd never seen it represented that way before.
Right. Well, you see the classic diagram that, you know, that one, it's got the 3 points that kind of move out of the circle. They overlap like an infinity sign or whatever, but they just kind of move. And so the diagram fails there because you got little parts that aren't perichoresed, you know. And then again, like the circle bit fails because you don't get the distinction. So it's just kind of, and this is one of the rules, and everyone should know that up front. There is no diagram. So don't even try and find that perfect diagram. Or illustration. That's true. You will always end up a heretic if you stick to your guns. Yeah. Stick to your guns on whatever illustration you think you got, you're going down, my friend.
Yeah, exactly.
Hold it lightly.
This is, I think, part of the problem. This is why you end up with Christians who are just like, what do I do with this? You know, because there isn't, you know, people like the simplicity of saying, you know, light gives heat, that, you know, that kind of pick something from creation. But when you've got something about God's nature that is just incomparable, you know, there's just nothing like it in all of creation. It is one of the things that makes God unique from anything in creation. And it is just, you have to embrace, you know, used responsibly, you have to embrace the mystery, you know, of the Trinity, the mind-blowing mystery of it. But also, just like you say, not get into contradictions. But the point you were making earlier, I mean, it comes down to that classic principle in theology, doesn't it, where you have to be careful to make a distinction without separation. And that's where many of those diagrams, you know, you have to keep a distinction between Father, Son, and Spirit, but you can't separate Father, Son, and Spirit. Not even the persons. So not just in the essence, but not even the persons can be separated.
Right.
Because they're connected by that word, perichoresis.
There we go. And on that point, obviously, you do sort of flow into both the history of Trinitarianism, the East-West tensions, and the heresies that developed and were solved through various councils. So we're all in that realm now. Key defenders, I think Horton has a great little section, talks about Irenaeus and Tertullian, who sort of developed the or especially Tertullian, the Western side of things that Athanasius then picks up on. The Cappadocian Fathers, Nick and I have just gone through some of them, or both of them, I can't remember now. But the brothers, yeah, we did do both of them, because I still made a quote about
there were
me
three,
being...
weren't there?
There was a girl,
Basil,
there was a sister, and
Gregory.
I think it was Basil, Gregory, and a sister.
Well, I thought there were two Gregories.
The brothers, Basil and Gregory, no.
Yeah,
Dunno.
Gregory of Nyssa and Gregory of Nazianzus.
Oh, that's it, yeah, you're right. All
There
right.
was a
So
sister, but she's not considered to be one of
No,
the
so there were three, that's right, yeah. So which brother would you be? That's the question, out of us.
Bro, I don't know, man.
was
Which brother
the-
do you think you are?
I was Basil, definitely, without a doubt.
Which brother is the brother with no prospects?
That was, I don't know, was that Nissa? I think that was,
Maybe I'll be
yeah.
that brother.
But he was also the sharp guy, I think. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
Totally,
Can't
totally
be that
rusty.
brother.
Anyway, so all I know is that the bigger brother was the bully to the younger brother, and I was like, oh yeah,
Oh, that's
Perfect.
Sounds familiar. Yeah.
sounds familiar. And anyway, so we got those guys, and they developed the Eastern side of things, if I'm not mistaken. And then Augustine comes along and develops the Western side of things. They end up with something. They obviously today with the Reformers, they came along and really grabbed hold of a lot of what the Cappadocian Fathers were saying, and the Eastern side of it, and rectified some of the overly Western elements. And yet, sort of, Calvin was a great example of bringing the two together and coming up with a really robust and best of both traditions. So that's how that basically works. But that gets us into some of the problems that were developed along the way. And this is just worth talking about, because often we'll use terms like this. Often some other doctrine, completely unrelated to the Trinity, will be likened to one of these heresies. It's just the way this goes. So modalism and subordinationism, what was that all about?
Well, so modalism is when you do the T.D. Jakes thing, and you say that there's one God who manifests in three persons. So it's the same God who sometimes appears as the Father, sometimes appears as the Son, sometimes appears as the Spirit. And the problem with that is that it fails to recognize the individual persons, the distinction of the person. So it's kind of like the Son doesn't really exist until God manifests as the Son. There aren't really any personalities.
There aren't any
within
persons.
God. Not any persons within
Yeah,
God.
so God wears masks is the best way I've ever heard, you know. And he has various modes. Subordinationalism is, of course, the heresy of Arius and the opposing view there, where basically, or the other extreme, where the way to solve it is there is one God, but Jesus is not, he's not true God, or he's a lesser God, or something like that. And then you get tritheism as well, where you just saying all of them are God. There are three gods, and all of these have taken various forms over the years, but those are the basic number of it. And then you get to a lot of it, I think, does overlap. We'll talk about it when we get to Christology, but Eutychianism and all of that stuff as well. But that's more related to Christ. So, okay.
Sabellius was the other.
Sabellius, yeah, exactly. Good. All right. So where are we now? What are we talking about?
Well, I think it'd be good to talk about just practical stuff. So, if guys have got the baseline down, one God, three persons, same in the essence, distinct in the persons, and revealed in these kind of familial terms to us, then that is everything else. Everything else is just trying to cross those lines. Those are the boundaries of safe play when thinking about God. So I think that's good. And some of the classic mistakes of you either go three gods or you go, one God without distinction of the persons. You don't want to go anywhere near any of those things. But I think all of this has been in the realm of trying to get right thinking going. But let's just say we do. Let's just say we have right thinking. We're not falling into the trap of contradiction. There's an appropriate amount of paradox and mystery, and we're mind blown. But kind of so what? How does this benefit us as Christians, or is it just inconvenient?
Yeah. Okay. I was just have we talked about essence or persons? Because I think we kind of presume everyone gets that, right? One essence, three persons, just in case you didn't get that. Because that would be like the super.
Well, I
the
think we
thing.
mentioned one
I think we
essence.
did mention
I
it.
hope
Okay.
that we've mentioned one
I think we went
essence and
straight
three
on to
persons.
economic imminent. But anyway,
Okay.
so, and that was largely, I think, again, the Cappadocian fathers that helped with that, just to come up with there was a whole big squabble. I'm kind of just bypassing all the squabble along the way, because I think that's where it gets overwhelming. As you read into the history, very fascinating, very awesome to look at, but just kind of not entirely helpful all the time when you're just trying to get your head around it. The tensions, of course, between the East and the West it's a big deal. And a whole lot of stuff came from that, but we're just jumping over all of that. All right. So in terms of practical benefits or just whatever, I think basically one of the things that you have to, one of the major things for me is just that, what is that? I wish I could find it now, but that thing that I think it was one of the Cappadocian fathers said, I'm no sooner drawn to the one than I'm drawn to the three, and I'm no sooner back to the three than I'm kind of drawn back to the one. And you know what I'm talking about, that famous quote. And I think that for me helps a lot, because that's kind of what we're looking at when we're talking about the devotional reality. It folds into what we were saying earlier. It shouldn't be possible for you as a Christian to really sit down and think about any of the attributes of God, really, but this reality of his person, without being completely just caught up in some sort of rapture. I don't want to make it sound like there's something wrong with you if you're not going there all the time. But every now and again, this sustained contemplation, sustained meditation of the Trinity will lead to worship, because you're dealing with God. That's the whole thing. There is no creaturely communication of this. There is only glimmers that this is the God who made it all. And so I think this is something very, very important to include in our regular meditation of God, to make sure that we're not bringing God down to creaturely level, so to speak, to make sure that when we're thinking about God, we are thinking about the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, what we were baptized into, what orthodoxy is, the God we actually worship. That's different from every other conception of God in the world. Trinitarianism is 100% unique Christianity. There is nothing like it. It's like that grace piece, or something of that nature, the incarnation, Christ.
Yeah.
You are dealing with a distinctive Christian thing here. Another thing I think that it can be helpful, just flowing on from that point, is that it helps for Christian unity. For me, it does anyway. In that because it's such a big doctrine, you are able to really, if someone's affirming the Trinity, that's a big deal. You can't quickly brush that person off. So Roman Catholicism and Protestantism would be the thing here. You are. If you're just brushing off someone who has believed in the same historic creeds that you have, there's a difficulty there. And I'm not saying you should solve all the tensions, but I'm saying there's got to be some sort of hesitance, because we're talking about something Christian at the baseline here, and that factors into unity. Yeah,
and that. There should be an eagerness to recognize that no one can say Jesus is Lord without the Spirit. There's a
wow. There we go.
There's when people are acknowledging the divinity of Christ, that He is part of the Godhead.
Yeah.
Then you have to acknowledge that. You have to recognize that for what it is. People can't do that. Without the Spirit. You cannot say Jesus is Lord. Now, there's more to that proclamation of Jesus as Lord. Obviously, it's also about the life, in submission to Christ as Lord, and about Lord meaning the kind of Lord He is, the Messiah, the Savior. So it's about trusting Him for salvation. There's more to that, but there's, you have to acknowledge that acknowledgement of Jesus' divinity is a Spirit-wrought thing.
It's just pretty awesome the way. Even by the Spirit who is God, there's just a triune thing even in that
So cool.
explanation of what's going on. Yeah.
Well, I like that Horton makes the point all the way through. Actually, the gospel helps us to understand the Trinity. It is, and the Trinity helps us to understand the gospel. So,
Yeah.
You see Father, Son, and Spirit at work in the same work of salvation, but in distinct ways within that work of salvation.
Yeah.
And you appreciate how it's that kind of connection of the three in one at work for us to achieve this thing, and it's so beautiful and harmonic, and it's just so cool to watch when you see the Trinity's mission of salvation outplayed in this kind of Trinitarian way as well. So I think it really can help to deepen our appreciation for how God is saving us through the gospel, which is very, very cool. But you touched on earlier another point about how the Trinity makes sense of life, because little things like, well, if we're made in God's image, why is it that we're not okay on our own? Why is it that we need community and need social things? Why is it that we pursue marriage? Why is it, that we want intimacy of relationships and that kind of thing? Why are we not just wandering around by ourselves? And that kind of need for community is part of our being made in the image of God. It's part of our representation of God in this world. And so, God cannot be part of his image unless there is some kind of community within the Godhead. Like you said, it helps us to understand why love is so important, and how actually, if you get back to an Islamic conception of God, of pure sort of oneness, monism, or whatever you call it, you have a problem, because there's to love requires someone to be loved, and you just don't have that within that conception of God, which means that God couldn't be loving unless he created people to love. Whereas in the Trinitarian idea or conception of God, God is loving infinitely on his own. He doesn't need anybody else to be loving. Loving comes from him. Lovingness comes from him. He is infinitely loving. And little things like that, the need for community, the kind of unity and diversity in the world, and all sorts of things like that just flow very naturally from a triune God.
Height, breadth, depth. Water, steam. No, sorry. I nearly went there.
John Frame, try perspectivalism. There you go.
I see triangles everywhere. everywhere. But, okay, let's answer the big one. Who do I pray to? And is it okay if I pray only to the Spirit? Through Jesus to the Father?
I don't know if we're going to... I don't know if we're going to say exactly the same thing here, but so I'd say this, that no prayer ever gets lost in the mail. Okay, so don't freak out about it. But there is a normal pattern of prayer in the New Testament laid out for us, which we should follow, which is pray to the Father in the name of the Spirit, in the name of the Son. According to the guidance of the Spirit, according to the help of the Spirit. So, I mean, that's the clear pattern laid out for us. I think we should follow it. Yeah. However, because it's certainly not irreverent in my view, or wrong, morally wrong, to pray to the Spirit or to the Son, because you're acknowledging their deity. Like that's right. But it's not the normal pattern. So just be careful with it. Don't talk about Jesus the Father.
Well, yeah, certainly. So and sometimes you hear that, right? In some charismatic things, it just goes crazy. Oh man, that's a story on its own. But so one of the ways, I think exactly what you were saying there, one of the ways just to kind of maybe quantify it, well, for me, the way I've done it anyway, which I think is kind of helpful. Certainly you have that pattern, as you mentioned, that's where it is, that's the norm. But then you kind of get onto okay, so how many times am I allowed to pray to the Father? Like once, and then I'm done, then I go back to the norm. And I think you've got to just, you've got to make sure that, I think you need to make the other point, just sorry, before I come back here, what you were saying earlier again, like you must be able to say, yes, I can pray straight to the Father. and the Son is the mediator. Yes, I can pray to the Son. Yes, I can pray to the Spirit. They're all God, and they're all working my redemption out for me. Even they're all God sounds weird. You know what I mean? He is
It's
God.
true, though.
Yeah, it is true. But you know what I'm saying? So, but I think one of the things is so it's not so much a, worry about when you've broken the amount of times you're allowed to pray in a different way from the pattern, but more when the pattern is not distinguishable in your prayers. So, and I think similar for hymnody and songs and sort of worship, if you go to a church and you're only ever singing to the Spirit, and there is no conception of the Trinity, or even just that pattern, then, that's a problem. There should be a discernible pattern in your prayers and in your singing. Same thing when you go to a church and there's just never, the Trinity is not mentioned at all. That's kind of scary. And, or one way or another. So I think when I pray, I just want to make sure that there is a discernible, norm, and it's not so much that I have to worry about it, but if there's a complete imbalance and no one would ever be able to, I'm thinking more like public prayer now. Obviously, no one's ever going to listen to my internal prayers, but as a pastor, if no one's would ever guess that I was Trinitarian, or that I was subscribed to that norm, I would say that would be a problem, Or it just be, when I say it'd be a problem, it would be a potential, a problem would be a likely imbalance. And so even there, you got to just be careful, what the indictment is. But anyway, so, what we're saying is it's, you can't just come along with a hard and fast this and that, because that's what the doctrine of the Trinity is. We've got to be able to say that one God, three persons, and yet we have to distinguish the persons. We have to say that Jesus is our mediator. We have to say that the Spirit helps us to pray, and we pray to the Father. One of the thoughts is kind of unrelated but pretty awesome, is that we'll see Jesus in eternity. We'll see him in glory. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but we'll see Jesus. There he is in his resurrected, glorified body, the firstborn of many brethren. Well, if you go with Klein's conception, we'll see the endoxation of the Spirit. It'll be the glory cloud. It'll be the atmosphere of heaven. It's the equivalent of the incarnation, so to speak. And you won't see the Father, unless I'm missing something there. But I think that's kind of quite profound. So it's just you've got the almost like the filioque, filioque. That sort of thing. The Son and the Spirit. Does the Spirit proceed from the Son? Does the Spirit proceed from the Father and the Son? All that sort of stuff becomes very interesting when you think about the dynamic of how God relates to us, and even what we'll be able to not pray only, but who we'll see ultimately. So yeah, because. Anyways, lest I go on some some crazy trip. Let me pull the plug right here.
No, it's right. It's mind blowing. I mean, it is. And it's good. It's good to allow your imagination to go there and to be sort of like, man, this is. I think it should be the goal of every Christian to move beyond this is difficult and inconvenient, to go to this is mind blowing and awesome. Like
here's another thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just let's go ahead. Let's jump in and freak people out. But at the baptism of Jesus, classic example of the Trinity, right? In action. In fact, one of the major proofs against modalism, where you've got the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. And Jesus is the Word of God, right? So ordinarily, I would imagine that when the Father says, "This is my Son, with whom I am well pleased," that would be the kind of thing that Jesus would do. Do you know what I mean? And it's just like, okay, so now you get to hear the Father, though, And then the Mount of Transfiguration, there you see the glory cloud, you see the Son, his transfiguration, Christ, the Spirit, very united. There's some amazing sort of thing going on there. And you hear the voice of the Father. But Jesus is the Word, though. Maybe it's the perichoresis thing. But wow, isn't that amazing?
Well, and that could be quite important because, by saying Jesus the Word, we're not just saying an abstract concept of speech. We're actually saying, no, a person who enacts the voice of God. He is the one enacting the creative voice of the Father. So,
maybe we hear the voice of the Father in heaven. Maybe we.
Hey, I like that.
I think
like that.
I think that's the closest biblical picture we got. Crack the code. Yeah. Crack the code.
Done it. Yeah,
Done it.
That's
another great 2-age Sojourner. You're so glad you joined the party. I know the people were. Now you know why you got to wait till the end of the podcast. You got to listen to the end to get the gold. Totally. All right. Good. So much more we could say, but let's leave it there because this is our intro playlist. All right. Let's play out.